The screen that is appearing up right now is showing the organizations that are co-hosting this webinar, Hortophilia and Great Plants to Nurture. It is being hosted by the Florida Horticulture for Health Network, the International People Plant Council, and Mid-Atlantic Horticultural Therapy Network. So thank you to the co-hosts for organizing this. I'm Leslie Fleming, and I'm hosting this webinar, and I am being supported by Jessica Sullivan and Bree Stark. Thank you for providing the technical support. So we're going to begin shortly. A few items, if you will allow me. Audio and video for participants has been turned off. If you see that it is appearing on the screen, please turn it off just so that it's not distracting for the presenters. Please use the chat box for questions, which will be covered at the conclusion of the webinar. And a recording of this webinar will be posted on the Florida Horticulture for Health Network YouTube channel. So thank you for joining in. So our first speaker is Diane Relf, who will start sharing her screen now. So Jessica, if we can stop sharing, thank you. And we'll get Diane to start sharing her screen. And I'll do the introductions. It's my honor. Diane is Professor Emeritus in Horticulture from Virginia Tech, where she established the Virginia Gardner Mass Media and Educational Program, the Virginia Extension Master Gardener Program, and taught horticultural therapy and urban gardening. She was instrumental in founding what is now the American Horticultural Therapy Association in 1973, serving as its president from 75 to 79. Active now with the International People Plant Council, she was its chair from 1989 to 2003 and continues to provide leadership to this organization and to the rest of us. Recognized for her body of work, Diane was elected as a fellow of the American Society of Horticultural Sciences in 2002 and one of the top 100 ASHS members of the late 20th century for contributions to growth and change in horticulture, and that happened in 2001. So Diane's going to start the webinar off with Hortophilia. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us, Diane, and we're ready for you to start sharing your screen.
Okay, I have my screen on my computer, but I don't have I have my PowerPoint, but I'm not seeing anything else. Jennifer, is there something missing? Am I sharing the screen with you guys?
I can't see it.
Okay.
Bottom. There you go.
Is that working now?
Perfect.
Can I be heard?
Yes, absolutely. Take it away.
Thank you first for inviting me to talk about Hortophilia, because it's a new concept that we're trying to introduce that will have a lot of potential impact on how the field of horticulture and human well-being is developed over the next few years. Basically, hortophilia is a term being used now, being introduced as a subset of biophilia. Biophilia is something most of us think we know what it is, but we'll discuss next what biophilia is and how hortophilia fits in. But why do we need a term, hortophilia? Well, for one thing, it can be used to unify the conversation about horticulture and its impact on health and well-being, its use as a therapeutic tool, because it focuses on growing plants, the love of nurturing plants, the love of being in the garden and actively participating in the garden. When we focus then on these concepts, it directs the research that's done. So very often the research that we've seen over recent years has been horticultural therapy, and it's been actually what's now being called nature therapy or forest therapy or many other things, but it doesn't talk about horticulture. That is the cultivation of the garden. And by using a term and developing and understanding a term such as hortophilia, it can focus our practice more relevantly. We've seen over the years that if you're working with plants, people call it horticultural therapy, when what it might be better called is occupational therapy because you're just cooking those plants, or it might be recreational therapy because you're just making art of those plants. But unless you're actually using those plants as a tool to nurture and have responsibility and have the satisfactions of these things, then is it really horticulture? So first, what is biophilia? Well, according to Wilson and his predecessor Fromm, this is the urge of emotional affiliation of human beings with other forms of life. Often because much of the research done by Kaplan, Ulrich, and all of their protege was with trees, it was funded by the Forest Service. And so we lose track of the fact that we're talking about all other forms of life. So Wilson himself was actually more involved in entomology than he was in tree work. But we have an affinity for all other forms of life, according to biophilia. So it originates from the Greek, meaning love of, and it's the love of life, bio, and living things. And this is believed to be, the hypothesis says it's an ingrained love of nature that's intuitive and a natural drive that's part of our DNA. And it asserts the human dependency on nature that extends far beyond the simple issues of material and physical subsistence. We know we have to have the earth to breathe the air, to make the food, but it encompasses as well the human cravings for aesthetics, intellectual, cognitive, and even spiritual meaning and satisfaction. Biophilia can mean both the love of living creatures and love of nature, life, as understood as a set of living creatures, plus the abiotic environment. So it's not just loving the trees, but loving the rocks under which the snakes live. So biophilia is very broad and very encompassing. And as the concept of biophilia that we need to relate to hortophilia is that there are so many things that we need to know and understand. Environmental preferences and the impact they have on people, differences in natural environments, the difference of human experience. And let me tell you right now, you're going to have access to this material, and so you don't have to get down everything I'm saying right now, but I'm just giving it as a overall broad picture of the kinds of questions, the different human experiences with nature that have gone on through evolution. I mean, for millennia, there was just the living in nature. Then we learned to cultivate nature. Then we've moved away from nature. What impact does that have on how we relate to nature? And what impact must it have in the future? How much nature is needed? Or for us in horticultural therapy and horticulture and health, how much gardening time is needed and for how long to obtain a real subjective or objective benefit? What age do we need the nature? What is the relative impact of the perception of real nature versus synthetic or virtual nature? That's photos, plastic plants, paintings, computer generated. As most of you probably realize, much of Kaplan and Ulrich's work was done in a room contained with showing pictures of slides. How does that impact the actual research? And what is the comparison in this research? So there's all these kinds of questions that we need to understand. And within that context, then we need to move them on to what we need to understand in hortophilia. So where did hortophilia come from? And where did that term come from? And why are we so interested in it? Well, it was first introduced as part of an art concept. But then Sachs, a friend of the artist, expanded the word hortophilia to describe a deep bond between people that they have with their gardens, and to manage and tend the garden, to water a sagging plant, a dead-headed geranium. So this rings a bell more with what we're talking about, because it is in the garden, in the cultivated, nurtured part of our environment. But we've gone on to look at deeper explanations, or more concerned with what this hortophilia is as a hypothesis. And what I've done first is try to understand it myself, seeking to, I see hortophilia hypothesis seeks to explain the need of humans to manage and tend to the gardens. It's not just being in the garden, but it is caring for, nurturing, tending that garden, and the intrinsic love of actually nurturing plants. It explores the idea that while a person involved in horticulture, that is the cultivation of a garden, gains all the benefits of the nearby nature and biophilia, certainly the plant aspects of biophilia, and I might add definitely the insect aspects of biophilia, and quite a bit of those little creepy, crawly, four-legged, furry creatures that like to eat on our plants, and the snakes and others. There is much more to experience from actually caring for the garden, because in my opinion, and there are many other theories that will come forth, but two of the major factors that are really important in hortophilia are the personal responsibility for the garden and the creativity that is integral to horticulture. So first, personal responsibility. There's something called the self-determination theory, and I'd love for you to go explore it a great deal more. But as that relates, the critical aspects of gardening are making your own choices about what to grow. And early research has documented this. Connecting and working directly with, that is nurturing the plants, and often working with other people. There's a big social element. And then learning and improving skills and knowledge so that you really have a great deal of self-determination. So much of our work today doesn't share that ability to make decisions for ourselves, take action for ourselves, learn and change. And so it gives us a whole different place of personal responsibility. And therefore the sense of personal accomplishment. When I think of something like this, I think just of anecdotes constantly throughout my experiences. The young woman who had been involved in as a juvenile delinquent, a prostitute, 15, and she's been to, had all of these horrible experiences. She says, I love the greenhouse. I have to get up every day in the morning because my plants need me. If I don't get up, nobody's going to water them and and be able to take care of them. And so I have to get up and I have to care about the plants. So self-determination, personal responsibility is a major key. And then the other thing that I deeply and genuinely believe, and I've been finding problems finding the right hypothesis to express this, but all human beings are creative. That's without exception. We all create. People go, oh, I can't be an artist. Oh, I can't create. I can't do this. I can't do that. But I think it is innate in humanity, and it's an important part of being a human being. So, and that gardening is one of the expressions for creativity, where you have art and creativity as self-expression, or art and creativity as representation. And what do we mean by that? Well, by self-expression, you've picked out the plant and you've made it the one that works for you. I think of the play on Broadway many years ago, Raisin in the Sun, where the woman says, well, my plant defines me. Well, yes, your a connection to the plant expresses so much about you and the plants that you select and how you feel. Art is representation. Well, a lot of art, for example, for representation is paintings of a landscape. Well, a terrarium is a living painting of a landscape. Your home garden is a living painting of a landscape. It is a way of being creative and expressing your own creativity that you can manipulate, that you can make choices about, that you can express your feelings about. And it has that major added attribute of nurturing life. Nurturing life is a form of creativity that people may not recognize really, but there is nothing more creative than producing a life and nurturing that life and bringing it into some fruition. So these concepts, there are many, what happened, okay, as a result of my running across an article a friend sent to me where it says Hortophilia and talks about Sack and his concepts of Hortophilia. It was like a newspaper column. I began to explore it, and then I began to talk to many different of my friends that we've worked with together over the years, and found that there is an understanding and a belief that in Hortophilia that we do have some basic needs. So we, several other friends and I put together a poster, and this poster is actually the basis for this talk. And you will receive as an email a copy of the poster that was given at the IPPC AHTA conference last year, and a copy of the references that are cited throughout the poster, and several other things that we'll get to later. But so, and this poster discusses different models that reflect on, that contribute to the concept of hortophilia. This is models of horticulture therapy and horticulture for health, urban horticulture, community development, human health responses, youth and gardening, aging populations. As you can see, the term hortophilia is all-encompassing of horticulture and health and consumer horticulture. It talks about human beings. So it's not just horticultural therapy, it's not just urban gardening or urban agriculture, but it's all of these that share commonality. One of the most important to me is that is a long-term reflection of this basic understanding, but lack of the right word to bring about the belief that horticulture is an integral part of human beings, was put together by Dr. Matsuo in Japan back in the mid and late 90s. And what he's saying here is that you have two ways of perceiving plants. One is the sensory perception. So seeing, smelling, touching, hearing, tasting. And this is one way of perception, but it doesn't include all of the other experiences that you have with plants, which is the engaged perception. That is, you are actively doing something with the plants. So with the sensory perception, you're passing through, you're in smelling, hearing, you may be harvesting, picking, digging, but you haven't nurtured those plants. You haven't planted those plants. In modern terms, in terms of urban setting, what you're saying is the landscape architect came in and sat in the garden and you get to go sit under the plants. Okay, there's great benefits there. But that's not all that can be going on. The engaged perception is the making side. You design the garden, you plant the plants, you do cooking and other things with those plants. And so you're making things. But both of these then lead to the real core value of horticulture for therapy and well-being, which is fostering. Now, I will admit that Matsuo and I never came to an agreement on the term fostering versus nurturing. He could not use the term nurturing, and I think it's because the first definition of nurturing that comes up is to provide nutrients and to nurse. And those are certainly not the only thing that we're talking about. But I think most of us are seeing nurturing as a more encompassing act, taking care of the plant, sowing, watering, pollinating, propagating. The list goes on of fostering or taking care of the plant. So that will sort itself out as more research is done, as more philosophers write about it, as we learn more. Urban agriculture from Candace Shoemaker contributed this particular model as one that looks at how plants influence human health and well-being from an urban agriculture perspective. And I'm not going to go into the other models as much. Human health responses from gardening are from Dr. Parks in Japan, and look at actual research that she has conducted that demonstrates the human health responses from gardening. And you'll get citations for that work. And then community developed social and physical health is another model developed by Sherry Doherty, excuse me. At the University of Georgia. Again, working through master gardeners and consumer horticulture. Allergies, I'm really, pardon me, but it's just one of those things. So youth and gardening is another area that we did not have a model of how this interrelates, but I would say, and you may go back through and read this, but the impact that there's a great deal of evidence that shows that kids who are involved in gardening are healthier, more attentive, less stressed. And it also shows that if they are involved in gardening, they're more sensitive to the environment, more concerned about the environment as they mature. And then finally, it goes on to look at the merits that it's important not just to have planted the garden to start with, but to stay with the garden, to maintain it, to tend it, take care of the plants, harvest the plants, use the plants in different ways, get the full value and impact of nurturing and a personal responsibility and of creative expression. And then with our aging population, there's even greater significance to what needs to this whole concept of hortophilia, because as people are going into retirement, hold on again, sorry about the cough. But as people are going into retirement, they are finding more time on their hands, and very often as they've left a job, they're finding less searching for more fulfillment. And certainly the plants are one of those things that can be a major part of that fulfillment. Actually, COVID demonstrated, both for aging population, but for all people who were temporarily part-time, out of work, out of a job, no longer working full-time. COVID was a tremendous demonstration of the impact of plants, the value of plants to people who had time on their hands and suddenly needed to look for meaning in their life, because plant sales soared. People couldn't go out and run around and go to restaurants and find ways to make money so they could spend money, so they could make money so they could spend money. It wasn't all about economic growth. Instead, it was about plant growth, about nurturing your kids, nurturing your plants, caring about the environment, caring about what contributions you can make to life, all kinds of life around you. So definitely the sales of plants soared as people wanted to, in some cases, grow their own food just in case the whole end came to mankind. But as one friend pointed out, well, here's my $15 tomato that I grew. So simply food production was not really what it was all about, because indoor plants have soared. If you go to influencers on the computer about indoor plants, you'll find with 10,000, 70,000 followers, people that want to know all about what you're growing and who really get a kick out of finding out those special plants that you've grown. And I have seen the diversity of plants available on the market soar in the last few years. So people want the uniqueness, they want the plants, they want to cultivate, they want to brag, they want to share, but it's meeting so many different kinds of needs that we know that gardening, growing, nurturing plants has some kind of special meaning to humans when they slow down enough to stop and look at what they can really focus on and what they get genuine pleasure and excitement and satisfaction from. So I think it's a hint of the kinds of research that can be done. And particularly with the aging population, reviewing the research was that made clear the differentiation between nature experiences, that is biophilia, and the experience of the perceptions of senses versus the actual feeling of the perception of contributing and making something happen with the plant. So I think that we can certainly see from the research that we've collected that something special is going on. And the kind of research that's out there is very important because there's so much of it now, but it's hard to analyze and hard to understand. So one of the things that you as a practitioner, a potential practitioner, a researcher, a communicator need to understand and look at are the systematic reviews, the meta-analysis, the narrative reviews, where other scientists have done analysis of the literature through many different kinds of systems and have systematically reviewed what's the literature is out there, or they have done computer analysis that really makes in-depth comparisons. And in some cases where it's a qualitative difference rather than quantitative, narrative reviews. Understanding this kind of research and accessing this kind of research will be the key to your understanding in the future. But quite frankly, it's a topic for a separate webinar. And I can tell you, Candace Shoemaker can do a wonderful webinar on that. She's done some excellent work in this direction. So, but what we will, in fact, what I will be providing you with is a list of some of the meta-analysis and systematic and narrative reviews that we've identified to this point, so that you can go and understand those reviews and understand the content of the research. Most of those reviews, it seems to me, are positive with regards to the validity of saying Hortophilia may in fact exist, and that certainly it's worth taking the time, the energy, the money to dig in depth to this, as it may be a very valid area that we need to pursue. And why do we need to pursue this area? For horticultural therapy? Absolutely. It can be a contributor to the many treatment programs that are out there. It's a co-treatment or a complementary treatment or an alternative treatment, or the list goes on and on of the kinds of ways that it can be integrated into therapeutic treatments. But what about the rest of it? What about people that live in apartment buildings? What about the increased rate of suicide of young people? What about many of the issues where people simply do not understand life, responsibilities, nurturing. It's amazing to me to find somebody with a master's degree that had no idea that that little thing inside the seed was actually and truly a plant, a baby plant. You know, that seed would grow up to be a big plant. They had no idea. Concept was not part of their mind. They probably covered it in the 3rd grade for 15 minutes, but didn't stick past that. So we need to understand what we need to do to put people back in touch with nature and to keep us bonded with natural and natural phenomena, keep us part of the humans that we are. So assuming hortophilia is indeed an evolutionary fact, the same as with biophilia, we need to have information, not just that, yes, gardening works. And that seems, but we need to have specific information. Are there certain plants, and we'll be hearing some about some good ones, are certain cultural practices that are related to psychophysiological or psychosocial or other effects that are important? Are there different things in different gardening cultures, where humans grew up or where they evolved, that relate to the response of different people to plants? Different human experiences with the care and cultivation of plants. Does it relate to whether you're male or female, or how your culture addressed those things? Specifically, how much, and then very specifically, how much plant care and culture, what kind and for how long is needed? That is, for once a week for an hour, is that sufficient, or do we need a bit more time to get both subjective and objective benefits? And also the optimum age to initiate gardening. The work with youth has said the young people will grow up with a better attitude toward nature and gardens if they start at a younger age. So from our paper, we have just begun to develop the Hortophilia hypothesis. It is our intent that by advancing the Hortophilia hypothesis, it will inspire researchers to develop and test theories that clearly demonstrate the mechanisms of health through gardening, just as E.O. Wilson's biophilia hypothesis inspired the development and research, such as the theories with Kaplan's attention restoration or Ulrich's psychoevolutionary theories for stress. So we hope that there will be new and more theories, more hypotheses that will be researched. But at the same time, and more immediately, we think that it may help to be able to talk to each other about the subject a little bit more clearly, and that it may help us focus our practices on the actual act and art of gardening. Thank you very much. And do know that you will be receiving handouts, should we call it homework, that you can pursue these topics and you can take actions to move forward with understanding the concept of hortophilia. Again, thank you very much.
Thanks, Diane. That was fabulous. Your points about defining some of the terms we use now to tease out more detail and health impacts really is the next wave in many fields, using caring for plants, your main point. And that includes horticultural therapy, art and creative expression, and horticulture sectors. So thank you for being yet again a thought leader, an important thought leader for us. So you can stop sharing your screen now. And as Diane said, we will be sending out the handouts within the next couple of days. I think there are 4 handouts that we'll be including, and we'll look forward to seeing that. Okay, so Diane, good. So we are ready for our next presenter, Siang Yu Tham. And Siang, you can go ahead and start sharing your screen. And I'm going to do the introduction for Siang. She is currently an instructor and research scholar in the Environmental Horticulture Department at the University of Florida and program manager at Wilmot Botanical Gardens. She received her certificate in horticultural therapy from the University of Florida, is a certified permaculture designer, and an editor of the Florida Horticulture for Health Network's e-publication Cultivate, where she recently coordinated a series on horticultural therapy worldwide. Her foray into horticulture began when she worked on organic farms in France, then as senior farm manager and head of education in an urban agriculture and foodscape company in Singapore, followed by establishing By Wind and Wave, a company which conducts nature-based programs. Siang is going to talk to us about great plants to nurture. And Siang, we're ready for you if you're ready to go.
Great, thank you, Leslie. If it's okay with everyone, I'm just going to stop my video so you don't see my face. It's a little weird looking at myself when I'm presenting, but you will be able to see my screen. All right, so Diane gave a really good introduction to Hortophilia, so I want to just jump right into the second part of our webinar where I'm going to talk a little bit about some great plants to nurture. And Diane talked about how Hortophilia really focuses on the fact that it involves nurturing plants or nurturing a garden. So when I first received the title for this webinar from Leslie, it sounded a little daunting to me because there are over 400,000 land plant species on Earth, and I can only pick a few to talk about today. So I want to just say that I think it's important for us to acknowledge and appreciate the value of all plants. But today we want to focus on plants that we as gardeners and people who use horticulture for health as part of our practice can use to nurture. These are plants that we can grow, that we can have in our garden. And these are plants that can benefit our well-being. So it's a short presentation. Today, I want to briefly talk about what makes a great plant for the purpose of horticulture for health. And then I'm going to go on and share 10 of my personal recommendations. So what makes a great plant? In horticulture therapy and therapeutic horticulture, we often talk about sensory stimulation. So it's the activation, right, of one or more of our senses, our sense of taste, sense of smell, sight, hearing, and touch. And research shows that sensory stimulation is important for cognitive development. Children use their senses to make sense of the world. That's one of the first few things they do once they're born. They need to feel the environment, they feel their mother, they feel the things around them, they taste, they smell, and these are their first introduction and first connection to the world. But using their senses to make sense of the world is also important for adults. And without variety in sensory input, we lose that connection with the world around us. Sensory stimulation can also aid communication, because it facilitates conversations about what you can see, touch, hear, smell, and taste around you. And that's why choosing plants that are colorful, vibrant, fragrant, or have different textures are important. I like using plants that are easy to maintain. I think that plants that are easy to grow, easy to nurture, make great plants for therapeutic purposes or for programs that involve horticulture for health. When I studied permaculture, my colleagues and I, we like to call ourselves lazy gardeners. So we want maximum output with minimum input. We can spend less time working and we can spend more time enjoying the fruits of our labor. And that can be very helpful in horticulture for health programs too. I mean, first, we are all very busy people. We have participants, we have clients, students to take care of. We have therapeutic goals that we need to achieve. We have administrative work to do. We have our personal lives to get back to. There are many aspects of our work that is important besides just growing a plant. So when a plant is resilient and easy to nurture, that makes the job a lot easier for us. More importantly, I think when you nurture an easy plant, there is a higher chance of success, and that can really build the confidence of the gardener or the participant who might be gardening for the very first time of their lives. This can be crucial for someone who is new to gardening. And Lee Deal, my supervisor at Wilmot Gardens, always says that it can be hard to get a participant to come for a program for the very first time. But once they come that very first time, it's easy for them to come back. And I'd say likewise for growing a plant. If you fail the first time, you might think twice about trying again. But if you succeed, you see that it's growing under your care, you see a new leaf, you see a seed germinate, that might encourage you to keep going. So I think as a start, it's nice and it's important to think about plants that are easy. They may be very simple for experienced gardeners, but that sense of achievement or that confidence that it gives you as a boost can be very important to keep that gardening journey going for you. And if you look at this third point, I say challenges you, that sort of contradicts what I just said, right? If it's easy, how can it be challenging? So not really. After you've been growing plants for a while, it's good to challenge yourself a little. When I was a kid, the first plant we grew in class was a little bean. It was a green bean, and you grew it on a cotton, a piece of cotton pad, and it grows. And everyone in the class had success. That was exciting. But if we were to start growing, I don't know, if someone gave us desert rose seeds instead, and we all started with that, chances are maybe only 10% of the class would succeed. We would get bored and we'd probably throw it away and never think about growing a plant again. But once you start off and you get success, it's pretty nice to challenge yourself a little bit, push your boundaries, pick a plant you've never grown, pick a plant that you've not had success with, and that motivates you. Once you've started off with a little bit of confidence, it motivates you to learn more about the plant's light and moisture requirements, the soil type it likes, the humidity it requires, and so on. And it's sort of like getting to know a person. When you teach a child to socialize, they might need some guidance. They don't know how to speak to someone. They don't know how to make friends. But once they gain confidence in meeting that first person and making that first conversation, they would move on to talking to someone new on their own and even try different ways of socializing with others. So that's very similar to how we would try a new plant when we're gardeners. And you feel that sense of accomplishment for succeeding. And even if you don't, there are lessons to be learned there, I'm sure. The fourth thing that I think makes a great plant, and this is something that Diane talked about earlier also, is that cultural significance. So I like plants that, have certain cultural, historical, or personal significance. At Wilmot Gardens, one activity that we like to do is we ask people to pick a plant from the greenhouse that appeals to them and share why. And we often hear things like, my mom used to grow this in our garden. This is an herb that we used to cook with back home. Or the fragrance of the flowers smells like my grandmother. It could be a very common plant or a plant that's not particularly interesting to someone else, but when a person feels a connection with that plant, nurturing it can be a powerful way for them to reconnect with an emotion or a memory or a person. And all of these sort of come to that final point that I have here is a plant that fascinates you makes a great plant. It could be its impressive flowers, it could be its amazing scent. It could be its trellising abilities, the way it crawls across the floor, the garden beds. It could be the way it changes its form. For example, there are plants that look very different in their juvenile stages from their adult stages. One good example is the pothos. When it's young, when we have them as indoor plants, they kind of look like heart-shaped leaves. But then if you see them in nature, in the wild, they are huge, they are big, and they are fascinating. And these are plants that make it exciting to grow, because as you are nurturing it, as you're watching its growth and development, you are observing the changes in that plant. And that makes it exciting for the person nurturing the plant. You can check on your plants every day, and it won't look the same. Something would have changed. And I know when I started as a gardener, when I started growing plants, I would go and look at my plant every single day. I would take pictures of it every single day, and I'm looking forward to a new growth. I'm looking for some change, some transformation. And so from here, you can see that different people may also find different aspects of a plant fascinating. It could be a shape, it could be a smell, it could be its function, and it really doesn't matter. As long as it fascinates you, as long as it fascinates your participant, your client, your student, it doesn't matter. And these 5 points of what makes a great plant also mean different things to people. What do I mean by that? A plant that is easy for me to maintain may not be easy for you. A plant that is culturally significant to you may not be significant to me. But that doesn't mean there's no value in me growing that plant. In fact, that's a wonderful way for us to learn about someone else's culture or someone else's interest. And these are all conversation points that can come up. And what I want to carry across here is that different plants are helpful to me and you in different ways. And what's important here is not the specific plant, but the meaning and the purpose that that plant serves here. So next, I want to recommend 10 plants that are great to nurture for yourself if you're thinking of increasing or expanding your gardening repertoire, or if you're planning Hort for Health activities. And again, bear in mind that I've lived and worked in the tropics most of my life, and a lot of the plants that I'm interested in, I'm biased towards the tropics. And I know we have participants today from the mid-Atlantic states, from Florida, where I'm based right now, and maybe even from other parts of the world. So your climate may or may not be conducive for these plants, but think about those 5 points that I just shared. About what makes a great plant, and seek alternatives that are easy to grow in your region and that can serve the same purpose or function. So the first is something that I've grown to like since I came to Florida, and that's begonias. These are actually native to the tropical and subtropical regions. Some of the hardy begonias can withstand cold temperatures, but they make great houseplants too. And like Diane said, after COVID, the houseplant industry has just gone insane. People are growing tons and tons of plants indoors. And this is one good example that you can grow indoors. It doesn't need a lot of light. It's pretty happy in a low light area of your house. And they are beautiful. Like if you look at the plant on the left, some of them have polka dots on them. That's an angel wing. And begonias have so many different leaf types. Some of them are pointed, some of them are a little bit more rounded, some of them are shaped like wings, and that's why it's called the angel wings. They have leaves of different colors. I've seen begonias with blue leaves. I've seen some with a silvery sheen to them. Some of them are red on one side, green on the other. And they have beautiful flowers that come in pink, come in white, yellow, and orange. I haven't seen many orange, but I know there are some with orange flowers. And what's really interesting about them is that they can be propagated from a single leaf. This is a fun fact that we like to share with our participants, and they are always very amazed by this. So if you look at the leaf here on this picture on the right, you'll see that big leaf that is on the soil. That is the original leaf that we took to propagate, and all the new growth are emerging from the veins of that original leaf. So it could be the shape, the visuals of a plant that appeals to someone, but even a new way of propagating plants can be interesting for our participants, clients, or students. Second plant I'm going to share is the cosmos. So these are great annuals. If you're familiar with hardiness zones, these grow in zones 2 to 11. So they can grow pretty much anywhere. They're easy to grow. Their blooms are beautiful. I love that explosion of color. They're non-toxic, so they're safe to grow for all ages and abilities. You can grow them in school gardens. You can grow them in assisted living facilities. And some species are also edible. So this picture on the right is a rice dish called nasi ulam that is commonly made in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and Singapore. And that is actually made by shredding the leaves of Cosmos caudatus with rice. And Cosmos is also a traditional medicine used in Mexico and Brazil for treating malaria. So this is a plant that's not only colorful and vibrant, but it also has multiple uses. There are cultures that eat parts of the plant, and they are just nice or beautiful to look at. Another plant that I think is really fun to grow is nasturtium. Their leaves and flowers taste peppery, and my participants and students are always surprised when they taste them. In my former job, we used to grow these for restaurants, and we would deliver them live in growing containers to the restaurants. And the staff would display them out in the restaurant for the customers to look at because they look like tiny little lily pads, and diners are intrigued. And it's something for them to talk about when they come and dine in the restaurant. So nasturtiums, they are grown as annuals in most regions. They flower in summer and in fall, but if you live in a frost-free zone, chances are they could be perennials where you live. So I used to work on a farm in France, and we would pick the flowers and add them to our salads for lunch every day. And it's such a simple activity, but it's a memory that I hold on very dearly, and I think about, every now and then. Now, another plant that I really like is swamp milkweed. Earlier, Diane talked a little bit about biophilia, and it's that love for all things in nature, all life. And one thing I really like about being in nature is the wildlife that we can see. So it's not just about the plants, but it's about the fauna that our plants attract. So it could be the birds, it could be bees, it could be butterflies. And in this case, the swamp milkweed is a host plant for the monarch butterflies here in the United States. And they are beautiful. They produce these beautiful flowers. This is the swamp milkweed. There are other varieties of milkweed, other species that have different colors, flowers. And there's a saying that if there's nothing eating in your garden, it means that your garden's not part of the ecosystem. And I really like that saying. So if I'm just, growing vegetables for myself, and that's all I have, and I'm spraying and I'm killing anything that comes near my plants, I may be benefiting from my garden, but I'm also missing out on a lot of other potential biodiversity that could enjoy this garden. And it's part of that whole sharing spirit. So I like growing pollinators in the garden, because as a gardener, be it for yourself or if you're working with a group, working with a population out in the garden, attracting pollinators or attracting wildlife to the garden can be very fascinating for the people in the garden. Just to be able to see, birds or butterflies fluttering around your garden. And it's always a point of interest when someone walks into a garden, they see a butterfly, almost everyone immediately points out, hey, look, that's a butterfly. So one word of caution that I have is that the milkweed produces a milky sap, so that's poisonous. So if you're working with populations who are prone to putting objects in their mouths or rubbing their eyes, you might want to avoid this plant and maybe go for other pollinator attracting plants, like Coreopsis, Rudbeckia, and so on. So not only can we enjoy the blooms of these plants, but we're also inviting cute little visitors to our gardens. Right, so next is jewel orchid or Ludicea discolor. This is actually a plant that is native, a tropical plant that's native to Southeast Asia. I love the colors of the plant leaves. You can see it's got a dark green leaf, and it has these beautiful pinstripes on the leaves. I've seen varieties that are orange as well. So this is a terrestrial orchid that grows in soil and not on trees. It's easy to propagate from cuttings. You can also propagate them by division, by dividing a main mother plant. It has beautiful flowers too, like all orchids. Although it's not as showy, the flowers are not as showy or fancy as the epiphytic orchids. Still, it's a beautiful plant that it's a great plant for terrariums. It's a great house plant. If you're living in cooler climates, this might not be ideal to grow outdoors, but it can be a great plant to have in your house. This is a plant that I was recently introduced to. So it's the American lotus. It's an aquatic plant, so a little bit different from all the other plants that I introduced earlier. It's native to North America. And as I was researching this plant, I found out that Native Americans considered the flower to have magical powers. Very cool. So if, funny story. So if a man wanted to make a woman fall in love with him, he would rub the root of this lotus in the palm of his hands and then trick her into shaking hands with him. So if she did that, then within a week, she would decide to marry him. So maybe not so appropriate these days, but you know, it's a funny story, or it's an interesting story to share about this plant. And there are other cultural significances too. So for example, the root can be boiled, and in the past it was boiled to make a red dye that was then used as a body stain, so a dye to kind of stain the bodies of the natives. It was also used to treat sunstroke and fevers. And they are pretty tall plants that flower in summer. So I believe they grow up to 6 feet. And I can't remember what the name of that phobia is, trichophobia. So if you're afraid of like repetitive patterns or, you know, things, circles all gathered together, this might be a scary plant for you. But if you look right now in the center of that flower, you'll see that it's about to go to seed. So when it goes to seed, the seeds are born in a pot that resembles a shower head. So there are a lot of concentrated circles, but that can make a fun plant for seed harvesting activity, for example. So next is another native plant, the giant cane. So this is a native bamboo. It is native to North America, and I am a big fan of growing native plants, you know, because we've mentioned they attract pollinators, and they're easy to maintain. They're adapted to the environment. They thrive in our environment, and they provide food and shelter for wildlife that will support the ecosystem. And this is probably not something you'll want to grow indoors or in a small container. I'd say this is really a plant that goes outdoors, and it grows well in more swampy areas. But you know, if you have an outdoor area, giant cane can make a great living fence, a privacy screen, or a windbreak. And the great thing about bamboo is that when the leaves rustle in the wind, they sound very, very soothing. And this is a great plant for you to introduce into your garden if you want some sounds of nature in your environment. Next is a kind of a big group of plants, succulents. So one of our interns dislikes growing succulents because she says that they're non-communicative. But actually, I kind of beg to differ. If you've ever overwatered a succulent, you'll know what I mean. It tells you immediately, right? It tells you with its mushy leaves, it starts to lose its color, it turns dark. And it's not that they're non-communicative, it's just that they grow much slower than a lot of other plants, and they have different needs and respond differently to light and water. So I've done this comparison earlier, but I often like liken gardening to getting to know a person. Different plants have different likes, different needs, just like us humans. So if you're used to growing more herbaceous plants, a succulent could be one of those challenging plants for you, because you have to adjust all your expectations of what a plant needs and how a plant grows. And they are known to be very slow growing. So if you're someone who is expecting, instant gratification, you want to see great transformation quickly, succulents may not be that plant for you. But if you're working with populations who don't have much room for plants, or who may not be able to water their plants regularly, if you're someone who tends to forget about their plants, then succulents could be great for you, because they like to be left alone. They don't like a lot of water, and they really enjoy well-drained soil. So really, it depends on who you're working with and what their interests or their abilities are, and how much time they have to garden. So there are a lot of succulents. My favorites are the tiger's jaw and Haworthias. Haworthia is the one that's right in the middle that kind of looks spiky, but it's not really spiky. It's a beautiful plant. So very quickly, my final two recommendations are they kind of belong to a large category of food. And this is something that I think has become a huge interest in recent years, not just because of COVID, but as people are transitioning, more people are transitioning into urban lifestyles and living in areas where they're more and more disconnected to nature. Growing your own food can be something very empowering. And since we're talking about horticulture for health and hortophilia, it makes sense to talk about food, because what we eat has a crucial impact on our health. I used to work extensively with children in school gardens, and growing food always gets them excited. The vegetable haters always end up eating the vegetables they grow. And they would ask if they could bring some home. They want to show their parents what they grew. They want to take it home so their moms can cook it for dinner. And it's a great way to introduce new foods to children. But for adults, it can also be very empowering to be able to take control of your own health, to regain some form of autonomy, to increase food accessibility, and to reconnect with our food system. And again, part of that whole theory of hortophilia is it's not just about the food. Food is one aspect of what you're gaining, being able to eat what you grow. But a lot of it comes from that personal responsibility, the self-determination that comes along with growing plants in general. And when I worked with older adults with dementia back in Singapore, growing food was a very effective way, because it brings back memories of tastes that they're familiar with, and it takes them back to their childhood where growing their own food was more common, unlike the urban lifestyles that they have to adjust to right now. And here in the picture, you see Cuban oregano, eggplant, elderberry, ginger, and lavender. Again, these plants are propagated differently, some from seeds, some from stem cuttings, some from rhizomes. So it's not a situation where if you've grown one plant, you've grown everything. Every plant has its different ways of growing. They take different forms. So any plant that you choose could interest someone in a different way. Herbs and spices, they are fragrant and they can really lift your moods. When I grew kaffir lime, this is a type of citrus that we use a lot in Asia, in Southeast Asia. I used to always have a lime leaf in my pocket or in my bag, so I can smell it wherever I went. And many herbs and spices are said to have medicinal properties. In the first picture, you have the Cuban oregano, or we call it the Indian borage. It's used as a remedy for a respiratory issue. So if you have a cough, you could pluck a few leaves, steep it in hot water. Maybe we should send some to you, Diane, and drink it. And it really helps to soothe that itch or that discomfort in your throat. And you can also tell that it belongs to the mint family because it has a square stem. So, interesting fun facts about plants. finally, my final recommendation for today. It's a sneaky recommendation I'm putting in here because it's not a plant, but it is something that I recently introduced in our student program here at Wilmot Gardens, and it's culinary mushrooms. So they are not plants, these are fungi. So maybe we need a new term, mycophilia. But I wanted to introduce this in today's webinar because we talk about nurturing plants or nurturing life in the garden. And I think mushrooms are an important part of the ecosystem. There's a lot of it that we don't understand yet, but from a therapeutic standpoint, I think this is a plant, or not a plant, but a species that is very fascinating to a lot of participants here. You can see in the photo, our two students with the mushrooms that they successfully grew, and they were very happy to call themselves mushroom parents for the day. And they were taking photos of it. They brought it home to cook. And it's a pretty easy activity for our participants. You can buy ready to grow kits from suppliers all over the United States. Or you can learn to produce them or cultivate them from scratch. And it's a very interesting scientific procedure involved in it. And it's very different from what we are familiar with or used to in growing plants. So if you are a seasoned gardener, maybe this is a challenging thing that you could add to your repertoire. All right, so these are my 10 recommendations. You might be familiar with some of these plants, but I hope you also found one or two interesting ones that you can add to your own gardens or to your own programs. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. That was really interesting, Siang. Sharing plants that you, as an experienced horticulturist and HT practitioner, have suggested really has provided great information for experienced and beginner gardeners, recognizing that nurturing plants provide many benefits. And we now understand is supported by the Hortophilia hypothesis. I want to thank you for incorporating connections to culture, to health domains, to intellectual and sensory stimulation in your presentation. That really was expansive. And yes, it was a big topic. So nice job. So we are ready to do question and answer. Jessica, could you help us by activating video for Diane, Siang, and myself, please? And we can put questions in the chat box. I think there are a few in the box already, so we can start off with that. And these can be directed to Diane or Siang. So the first one is giant bamboo you mentioned, is it invasive? And I think Jessica has provided some information in the chat box. Siang, I don't know if you're looking at the chat. And I, as an extension agent, Jessica Sullivan from Osceola County, has a pretty good understanding of horticulture. And tell me if you have a different take on this, Siang. But Jessica has shared bamboo is native, so it's not considered a destructive invasive plant. But that doesn't mean it can't spread in some areas. Right plant, right place. That's Master Gardener mantra. And then she has put a link for those of you who want more information. Siang, do you want to add anything?
No, so I think what Jessica said is absolutely right. And she probably knows a lot more about, growing plants in Florida than I do. And she's absolutely right. This is a plant that is native. It's not considered invasive, but with bamboo, it's always important to take note of where you're growing it. They do have the potential to spread if you allow them to. So yeah, like she said, right place, a right plant, right place.
Right, great. Okay, so the next question, are succulents better indoors in Florida with our high rainfall? Are there any that are better suited to periods of rainfall that can be planted indoors? And I think there's a bit of a response from Jessica, but you go first, Siang.
Yeah, so with succulents, these are plants that really like well-drained soil. They don't like to be sitting in soggy soil or wet soil all the time. And with Bree's absolutely right that in Florida, with a high rainfall, it can be too wet for a lot of these species. So like Jessica suggested, I think it's always best to grow them under a porch where they're not exposed constantly to rainfall or to moisture, or plant them in really well-drained medium. So we use a lot of sand, we use perlite in our potting medium when we're growing succulents. So I think these are important aspects of a plant that we kind of need to bear in mind also when we're choosing a plant. With succulents, I know a lot of homegrown growers, what they like to do is they plant them like what Jessica suggested, either under a porch or they keep them in pots. They don't put them in the ground, so that in times of rainfall, these are plants that you would take indoors.
Great. Now, Diane, we haven't given you a chance. You're a horticulturist too. Jump in. What do you want to
Okay,
share?
I want to comment on succulents because they are probably currently my very favorite plant. And so I thought I might share with you why they're such a favorite. Most of your succulents propagate very easily from cuttings and from leaf cuttings. And therefore, currently in my greenhouse, I have, being an almost OCD plant propagator, I probably have 400 plants because I have several sessions coming up at our local museum, working with master gardeners at our local cultural center it is, and several other places in town for what we've been calling pass along plants. And this is to be able to give these plants, especially to kids, because kids love succulents. And they have some insurance of life out of that succulent for at least for a pretty good while, whereas you give them a pot with a seed in it and who knows whether it'll make it home. So they get their free succulent on the condition that when it gets bigger, they'll make some leaf cuttings and propagate it and pass it along to someone else. So they're looking at propagation, at how plants grow, but for me, even more importantly, sharing those plants. And there's so many different conditions under which the succulents will grow, but a bright window takes care of most of it, and getting watered now and then, you know. So I know it to grow well, they take a lot more care than that, but kids can manage them very, very well. So they're a favorite for me right now.
Wonderful. I'd like to hop back to bamboo, another resource from Jessica Sullivan, UF Extension Agent. She puts great resource on learning about bamboo, and there's a link, and she has commented they have a conference in Florida this fall. So for those of you really into bamboo, you might want to do that. Okay, I've got a question for both you ladies. Is excessive watering a big culprit in mismanaging? And note, I didn't say killing plants. And how do you water better? I think this is a question from experienced and beginner gardeners. Diane, you go first. I see you smiling.
Well, my first thought is, if it's a beginner gardener, I try to avoid excessive watering by having them propagate the plants in water. Just grow it in water. You can grow it in water all winter. So, and that goes from sweet potato to coleus to the list goes on and on of plants that grow well strictly hydroponically, if you would. Better hydroponically because you'd give them a little fertilizer, but strictly in water. As far as overwatering is concerned, I used to tell my class, so many of them want to know, when do you water the plant? And so I said, well, there is one method that you can use to make sure on the watering. When I moved from graduate school here, I probably had 60 plants with me. Yeah, I know I'm obsessive, but I didn't have the time anymore to mess with them. So I watered every Saturday. And everything that needed watering every Saturday lived, and everything else died. And so I got a good system for watering. So there's many different approaches that you can use. Maybe you have something a little less sardonic or sarcastic to offer.
Siang, I see you laughing. What's your tip?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Diane said. There are so many different approaches to watering. I like the schedule idea of watering every Saturday. But if you're like me,
Most plants don't necessarily like it.
exactly. Or if I grow lots of succulents and I'm watering them every Saturday, they're all gonna die. So I think this also just comes back to, what I said about getting to know your plants. It's really like getting to know a person. It's not the same one rule fits all for all the plants in our garden. And I think that can be pretty daunting or scary for gardeners, for new beginners. I like to encourage beginners not to start off with too many plants, because you just get, I know it's exciting. When I see plants, I want to take them all home. But if I don't have enough knowledge about those plants, I'm going to end up killing them. They're going to die, and I'm going to end up feeling bad because whatever I tried didn't succeed. So first thing I'd say, start off with fewer plants, but also I like to touch the soil a lot. So I always stick my finger in. It's hard to tell just by looking at the surface of the soil. Sometimes it looks dry on the top, but if you stick your finger in, it's really moist at the bottom. So I always like to do a finger test if I'm not sure. But if it's a plant that I'm kind of familiar with already, I've grown it for quite some time, then I would go back to what Diane suggested. I know that I water it once a week and it's doing well, so I'll stick to that. I don't need to change up the routine. I don't need to surprise it with a watering on Wednesday when it knows it's getting its water on Saturday. Although I do like to do something we used to do back in our farms is we like to mimic nature once a week. So when we're doing watering for plants, we typically would just water the soil. So we water the soil directly, but once a week to mimic rain, because we live in the tropics and it rains all the time. So to mimic rain, we would use a kind of a watering, watering hose, and mimic that rain by showering all over the plant so that it looks like rain for the plant.
Right,
Yeah.
like a watering wand. Yeah. Great.
I want to clarify, please, Leslie, that when I said I water once a week, 60% of my plants died. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Just the survivors were there because I couldn't mess with those that weren't survivors.
And that's a good idea too.
So you can eliminate those that are not going to behave the way you want them to, if you're willing to let them die.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you really have to know your plants. And this is my main tool. Definitely digging in the soil, feeling of the soil, but also with many of my plants, I learned what they weigh. Pick them up. Especially hanging baskets. I just touch the bottom of them. Oh yeah, that's getting too light. Put some water on it. And as you really get to know your soil and your plants, looking at the change in color of the soil can gradually work on certain plants, but it's just still a good idea to put your finger down in the soil anyway. Besides, that's good for your health.
Well, and I have to say to both you wonderful presenters, this is the theme of today's topic, caring and nurturing plants. You have to get to know the plants, the Hortophilia hypothesis. So great. We have an interesting question from Emily, and it goes, any suggestions on engaging people with little to no experience with plants? I live in a military community and have some upcoming classes to work with active duty military. Response, ladies.
Diane, you want to go first?
Well, there's two things. One, there is getting to be a good bit of research and a number of programs online about horticulture with both veterans and active duty military. So search online and see what they're doing. They're doing some great things in England. They're doing some things around the United States. Find out what's going on and what they're saying on some of these programs. Beyond that, I think you need to find out, there's so many questions. How much space do they have? What kind of land opportunities do they have? Can they grow vegetables? Can they grow, how much time do they have? Just depends there's just too many factors that you need to identify. I will tell you one project that I just did. I was working with someone with physical handicaps, but we put gutter gardens, that is old gutters that have been pulled off a house because they weren't working anymore, they're leaking and all, around the deck. And I have this around my deck and everything. This year I grew radishes in it. It was really very rewarding. I didn't have to go downstairs out to the garden, but could harvest those radishes, watch them develop, watch them get harvested right away. And you know, within a month, practically a little over a month of planting them, and get some really good harvest right up close, and intercrop them with other plants. So just having a small amount of well-productive, well-planned area may get people hooked and fast, some fast production, because you can eat the leaves. As you know, the radish leaves are great in eggs and things if when you first harvest them. So that was just one example that comes to my mind.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Diane. I think plants that are going to germinate and grow quickly, if the military personnel are in and out, or they're whatever the location is, a short period of time. Another option, and I see Cliff has provided a link to High Ground, which is a UK organization working with active military and veterans, and PS Cultivate Summer Issue has an article on this organization. They have facilities and others where maybe there's a garden where active military come. And so someone else, a garden coordinator, may be watching the garden and maintaining it. So active military may come and do the activities, but they're not necessarily responsible, especially if they're moving in and out, to watch the full cycle of plants. Siang, did you want to add anything?
Not much. I agree with what Diane said, that really there are so many factors that come into play. We don't know enough about the group that you're working with to be able to give, you know, very specific examples that might be helpful to them. But I do agree that growing plants that are quick, that are that germinate fast, or that they can see results quickly, can be a good way to first engage them, just to get them interested first. One simple plant that we use a lot here is wheatgrass. You know, it's seeds that you can buy from a grocery store, and they're edible. You can juice them. You can just even keep them in by your window, and it's a great sensory plant because you can run your fingers over the plants, and it's a good kind of a nice soothing mechanism, or you know, a soothing plant to have by your side. I like growing edible plants a lot because I think it's something that people can relate to very quickly. These are plants that they're familiar with. They can taste them once they're grown. So there's that sense of accomplishment and sense of self-sufficiency that they get from growing those edible plants. So I think these two are pretty simple and good categories of plants that you can try or start off with. Another suggestion I wanted to give was Donna Hunt, one of our graduates from the certificate. She also works with military populations, but I don't have a link that I could direct you to. Leslie, are you aware of something?
Yeah, she's at Robin Air Force Base in Georgia. And if you connect through the Florida Facebook or email address, we can connect Emily with Donna, and maybe this is a networking group that we want to establish through these activities, people working with active military, which for those of us working with different populations, they have very different needs typically than veteran populations. So yeah, we'll try and make that connection. Great.
One other idea that came to mind that I would like to comment on, because they are moving and may not be able to carry the plants with them that they're growing, that might be worth trying to get partnerships with groups that need plants produced. For example, some of the reforestation groups, is there where you're planting along the waterways, you know, plants that propagate readily, trees, willows of all different kinds, just different kinds of plants that you might propagate, care for, and pass on to somebody else to use, so that the people who are doing the propagating work and the nursery type work know that the product is going somewhere else and is going to be used and is valued by other people, which just further enhances their benefit from doing it.
Right, excellent. And ladies, thank you for bringing out so many relevant points. We have to ask the right questions. There are people who can lead us to which questions we should be asking. And I think the big takeaway from today's webinar is really that caring and nurturing for plants, many of us have known that, but we have to build on the body of knowledge. And I think we can all contribute to that and certainly use that knowledge personally and professionally. So I'm going to wrap up today's webinar. Thank you, Siang. Thank you, Diane. Thank you to our tech specialists, Bree and Jessica. I'd also like to thank the co-hosts, IPPC, International People Plant Council, Matin, Mid-Atlantic Horticultural Therapy Network, and Florida Horticulture for Health Network. We have recorded this. It will be available on the Florida Horticulture for Health Network, and we'll probably get that up in a few days. And we will send out some handouts that Diane has prepared, again, within the next couple of days. So thank you all for participating, and we look forward to the next webinar that the networks will be providing. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.